This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
It's the Noon Report from Family Life, bringing a Christian worldview to what's happening in New York, Pennsylvania, across the country, and around the world. Weather with Kevin Williams, plus special features and reports with the Family Life News team. Now, here's what's happening.
Upping the ante. Good afternoon. Welcome to the broadcast. President Trump's new tax on steel and aluminum imports took effect today, and the European Union responded with tariffs of their own.
There may be some bump up in inflation, but what he is doing is short-term pain for long-term gain.
Liz Peek with Fox Business says this tariff tit-for-tat will eventually pay off for us, resulting in more jobs and more U.S.-made goods.
We have an incredibly unbalanced trade situation, and that is one of the things that Trump is hoping to rectify. So he wants to level the playing field.
The Labor Department announced today that consumer prices rose in February, but not by as much as economists had feared. The CPI, or Consumer Price Index, is the broadest barometer by which inflation is measured. A stopgap spending bill to fund the federal government through September now headed to the U.S. Senate. After passing the House last night, one Democrat, Maine's Jared Golden, supported the effort. One Republican, Kentucky's Thomas Massie, did not. 60 votes are needed in the Senate for passage. Barring a deal, Uncle Sam will run out of money at midnight Friday. It's what they call a government shutdown. Ukraine says it will work toward a 30-day ceasefire with Russia as Europe's largest war since World War II enters year number 4. Secretary of State Rubio emerged from high-stakes talks in Saudi Arabia yesterday.
We'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball's now in their court.
President Trump reacting to the proposed truce from the White House.
Russia's been easier to deal with so far than Ukraine, which is not supposed to be the way it is, but it is, and we hope to get Russia.
Trump ally Steve Witkoff is planning to travel to Moscow this week for face-to-face talks with Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin has really suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties to his forces, and they too may need a break.
Former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman, the U.S. has agreed to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The U.S. Education Department is being gutted. Nearly half of the 4,100 workers there have been fired. Randy Weingarten is president of the American Federation of Teachers.
Think about a country whose president basically says, I'm getting rid of education. What does that say about the future?
Education Secretary Linda McMahon.
Clearly, we're not taking away education. The president never said that. He's taken the bureaucracy out of education so that more money flows to the states. Better education is closest to the kids.
President Trump says he wants to shut down the Education Department and return education policy to the states. There's a court hearing today in New York for Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil. The Trump administration wants this guy deported for organizing anti-Semitic rallies at Columbia University. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt.
Liberals in the legacy media think that if you are a foreign national, you can protest and push Hamas propaganda. Under this administration, that type of activity, siding with radical Islamic terrorists, will not stand.
Khalil's First Amendment claims hinge on whether his actions in organizing those campus protests constituted protected political speech. The Arab agitator was arrested from his campus-owned apartment by ICE agents on Saturday. New helicopter restrictions are in place near Reagan National Airport in Washington. The safety action comes in response to January's deadly collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and a passenger jet. That collision claimed 67 lives. Elon Musk-owned SpaceX is on a mission to save 2 stranded astronauts. A rocket will blast off from Cape Canaveral tonight. Its destination is the International Space Station, where astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams have been marooned for months.
Everyone has sort of followed their saga for the last 9 months. Headlines of stranded in space and abandoned in space, which of course the astronauts deny that they feel that way. But clearly They went up for about a week. They stayed for 9.5 months, and that's not what anybody expected.
CBS's Mark Strassman says SpaceX will be dropping off 4 new astronauts once it docks with ISS. Wilmore and Williams expected to return to Earth on Sunday. Still to come on the Noon Report, counterfeit cosmetics, blacklisted prison guards, and phone-free schools.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Williams. Well, temperatures are down today, but they'll be back up tomorrow. I'll have the numbers and the complete forecast coming up in 10 minutes.
All right, Kevin, we'll check back with you then. Let's check the stories making news where you live next, all across New York and Pennsylvania. New York has blacklisted thousands of corrections officers who refused to cross the picket lines this week amid a statewide protest over working conditions inside state prisons. Governor Hochul signed an executive order yesterday barring those fired workers from any future state employment.
That is the heavy hand of Hochul, and it should not be allowed. It has to be criticized. A court needs to set it aside.
Attorney Ralph Larigo represents hundreds of fired COs all over New York.
There are over 3,000 people, according to their numbers, that are still out of work. The state is still pursuing contempt, still pursuing civil penalties, and that the state has wrongfully taken away health insurance for those people.
He says the state misapplied the Taylor law to punish the corrections officers. Governor Hochul claims the 22-day strike cost taxpayers nearly $100 million. The governor is renewing her call for schools to be phone-free. She hosted a roundtable discussion yesterday with Common Sense Media on the benefits of removing smartphones from the classroom.
Childhoods have been stolen by a cell phone that has become all-encompassing. That has been the primary focus for years now, and that has to stop. We are seeing the decline in mental health of our children like we could never have predicted.
Parents we heard from had mixed feelings about the proposed cell phone ban.
Children nowadays are really focused on the cell phone use. I think it's gotten a little out of control. But if there is a school shooting, I want to be able to get a hold of my child.
I can understand that you need to put boundaries on cell phones throughout the day, but I would feel uncomfortable as a parent to not have communication with my kid during the day.
I think it's a big distraction for kids and the teachers, because the teachers can't teach if the kids are playing on their phone all day.
It's a hot topic in education, that's for sure. The governor says a bell-to-bell, distraction-free environment is crucial to academic proficiency and students' overall mental health. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro continues his pitch for green energy. He touted the benefits of renewables while visiting a hydroelectric plant yesterday in York, PA.
There are too many that just want to do nothing right now. But I'm here to tell you, doing nothing is no longer an option in Pennsylvania.
Shapiro says the state needs to invest more in wind, solar, and hydro power. The natural gas industry isn't digging that, however.
You can't run a full-time economy on part-time power.
Jim Welty, president of the Marcellus Shale Coalition.
We sit on top of one of the largest natural gas basins in the world, and we aren't having any conversation about natural gas generation.
Pennsylvania, by the way, is the second largest energy exporter in the entire country. Central New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney is urging the Senate to do as the House did and pass that stopgap budget bill to fund the government through September.
If we lose these Trump tax cuts, for example, there will be a huge increase in massive taxes for Americans.
Republicans will need the support of at least 6 Democrats in the U.S. Senate in order to beat the Friday night deadline. The continuing resolution, as they call it, funds the government through September. The New York Department of Motor Vehicles is calling on motorists to check for safety recalls that could affect their vehicle. 1 in 5 registered vehicles in the Empire State has an open, unfixed recall that could put drivers at risk. A full list of the recalls can be found online at dmv.ny.gov. That's dmv.ny.gov. U.S. border agents have seized nearly $30,000 worth of counterfeit cosmetics, including skincare products that were bound for the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. We get details new at noon from Family Life's Brian Query.
The latest seizure, which took place on March 1st, included 60 boxes of fake Estee Lauder moisturizer shipped from Hong Kong to Allentown. Officials warn that counterfeit cosmetics may contain harmful chemicals linked to cancer and skin conditions. Border officials urge consumers to buy from only reputable sources. Brian Query, Family Life News.
Thank you, Brian. Thousands of Pennsylvanians could miss out on their share of more than $52 million in tax refunds. The IRS says these refunds are for taxpayers who did not file their 1040 form for the 2021 tax year. That includes 53,000 Pennsylvania residents. The deadline is April 15th, which is tax day. It's your money, Pennsylvania. Sports is next. It's the 2-minute drill right here on the Family Life Noon Report.
Good afternoon, I'm Randy Snavely. Bob, it was a busy night on the ice last night. The Rangers were in Winnipeg to take on one of the best teams in the league, and the Jets held New York to just 1 goal to win their third out of their last 4 games, 2-1. Mika Zibanejad scored the Rangers' lone goal. In Anaheim, the Kings lit the lamp twice in the second period on their way to a 4-1 victory over the Islanders. Anders Lee had the Isles goal. The Penguins went to overtime before celebrating a 3-2 victory over the Golden Knights. Sidney Crosby lit the lamp twice in regulation, and Erik Karlsson scored the game winner just 49 seconds into the extra period. The Flyers' losing streak has reached 5 games after falling to the Senators 5-2. Other winners: the Bruins, Devils, Canes, Wild, Canadiens, Caps, and Predators. On to the NBA and the hottest team in the league. The Cleveland Cavaliers took down the Brooklyn Nets 109-104 to win their 15th straight game. The Cavs got 30 points from Darius Garland as they won their 55th game of the season. Detroit, Indiana, and New Orleans also picked up victories. Well, it didn't take long for the Buffalo Bills to make another splash. After securing Josh Allen for long-term, Buffalo improved their defense immensely by signing 5-time Pro Bowler Joey Bosa. He immediately becomes a starter on the Bills' defensive line. Boy, you get the sense and the feeling that Buffalo is serious about winning the Super Bowl next season. That is a look at sports.
All right, Randy, man. And before we move on, one other bit of sports news. Tiger Woods' return to golf will not happen in Georgia next month. The 15-time major winner revealing yesterday he just had surgery for a ruptured Achilles. While that surgery was minimally invasive, the recovery time would put him outside the window to play at next month's Masters tournament in Augusta, Georgia. That's a tournament that Tiger has won 5 times. Still to come on the Noon Report, a midweek edition. Tariff turbulence, SpaceX to the rescue, and healthcare in America.
Welcome to Breakpoint, a daily look at an ever-changing culture through the lens of unchanging truth. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. A few weeks ago, online rumors erupted that Kathleen Kennedy was stepping back from her longtime role as the head of Disney's Star Wars franchise. Though the rumors were false, they were enough to incite a social media flurry, analyzing the state of our art, our entertainment, and our culture. Now, Kennedy's time at the helm of that galaxy far, far away has been controversial. The Mandalorian and Andor were hits, but most of the other offerings and ideas during her tenure did not go over nearly as well. That was especially true when quote-unquote woke storylines were confused with good storytelling. For example, the creators of The Acolyte bragged that the series would be the most gay in the Star Wars franchise. It was pulled after just 1 season for low viewership. Even so, at least according to pastor and Lutheran satirist Hans Feen, it wasn't just the wokeness that was the problem. In a recent article, he wrote, and I quote, "The failure of modern Star Wars was not just a Kathleen Kennedy problem. It was a cultural problem. We do not want our heroes to be more righteous than we are," end quote. Our superheroes certainly have been downgraded over the years, and more than just from being superhuman to enhanced human. Remember, in the Tobey Maguire movies, Spider-Man was an earnest hero who could identify the enemy and understood his role in the fight. Even in the darker-themed Batman movies that struggled with deeper questions of meaning and revenge and morality and justice, Christian Bale was still clear that there were bad guys and they needed killing. Today's Marvel movies feature quippy heroes who don't take much of anything seriously, but, they still do end up on the right side of Thanos. Those stories stand in sharp contrast with others that fully blur the lines of good and evil, hero and villain. In the movie Maleficent, the Bad Queen is working through her trauma of not being invited to Sleeping Beauty's christening. In Wicked, the witch is not really wicked. She's a victim of discrimination and corruption. And likewise, the more recent Mufasa explores the sympathetic backstory of Scar and offers good reasons why he became evil. In this brave new world of villain backstories, the heroes and villains aren't all that different after all. And the same thing is reflected in real life these days. Western academics have been reimagining villains and heroes of history for quite a while now. Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln aren't flawed men striving for a better world. They're exploiters who lived exclusively for power. Much of this comes from the cultural and political left, but in more recent days, there have been voices on the extreme right who have attempted to make Western leaders like Churchill the bad guys while explaining away the historical villains like Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. As a musician named Cole Porter sang almost a century ago, and I quote, "The world's gone mad today, and good's bad today, and black's white today, and day's night today." History will never be understood, much less can we learn from it, unless we have clarity about what's good and what's evil. The very best stories recognize that even though the best of us have flaws, rejecting notions of good and evil altogether will leave us unable to recognize the flaws or learn from them. After all, there's really no possibility of making a better world if we think that there's no such thing as better. And there's no possibility of improving ourselves if we excuse away every fault. The Christian vision of life and humanity is better because it reflects reality. And that means we should have better stories, both fictional and historical, to tell the world. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with Breakpoint. Today's Breakpoint was co-authored by Dr. Timothy Paget. For more resources to live like a Christian today, visit us at breakpoint.org.
Thank you, John. Outside we go next, the always dependable Kevin Williams.
Here is your family life weather forecast for this afternoon. Just chilly. Any sunshine given way to cloud cover. High temps in the upper 30s to the upper 40s. Little patches of light rain and light snow in the area late this afternoon and tonight, focused on western and central New York. Overnight it's cloudy, low temperatures in the upper 20s and 30s. Tomorrow, morning clouds and some sunshine, high temps, low 50s, and even milder Friday again, with some sunshine and high temperatures in the lower 60s.
All right, spring is on the way. Thank you, Kevin. This is the Noon Report. I'm your host, Bob Price, and lots to get to. Wednesday, the 12th day of March. The news is better when it comes to inflation. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, was down 0.2% last month. The price you pay for the stuff you buy was 2.8% in February. That's down from 3% in January. President Trump's 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports took effect today.
We've been ripped off for years by other countries.
The White House says this move will level the playing field when it comes to trade, but at what cost to you, the consumer?
Either businesses are going to hurt or the consumer is going to hurt, and it's likely going to be sort of a shared pain between the two.
Kelly O'Grady with Money Watch says the upside to this tariff tit for tat is that more businesses will be forced to relocate inside the United States.
And so the idea is that over time, you would have more American jobs, more of the supply chain within the U.S. versus relying on other countries.
West Virginia Republican Congressman Riley Moore supports the tough trade talk by the Trump administration.
We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore, and we're going to put the American worker first and bring free trade and fair trade back to the United States.
The European Union announced today it will be imposing tariff countermeasures on U.S. imports. This would apply to not just steel and aluminum, but also textiles, home appliances, wood, and agriculture products. The EU tariffs kick in April 1st. A deportation hearing is happening in New York City today for 30-year-old Mahmoud Khalil. The Arab agitator was arrested last week for organizing anti-Semitic rallies at Columbia University and other schools. The White House calls Khalil a Hamas sympathizer. Khalil is a green card holder and was detained at his university-owned apartment by ICE agents on Saturday. The Trump administration has just taken a sledgehammer to the U.S. Department of Education. Half of the 4,100 workers employed there are out of a job today. NBC's Garrett Hayes.
President Trump campaigned on the idea of returning responsibility for education to the states. And now his administration is taking a big step towards making that a reality, rolling out deep cuts to the DOE's workforce here in Washington and around the country.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon says the ultimate goal is to shut down that department entirely. It would, however, require an act of Congress. House Republicans have narrowly approved a short-term spending fix to avert a government shutdown. The deadline for the Senate to act is midnight Friday. More from Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Noble.
Last night, Speaker Mike Johnson muscling through this bill by only a 4-vote margin. Only one Republican voting against the bill, one Democrat voting yes. This spending plan will keep the government open until September if the Senate passes it, and it boosts defense spending by roughly $6 billion while cutting non-defense spending by around $13 billion.
Overseas, Ukraine says it will accept a 30-day ceasefire in the war with Russia. The ball now squarely in the court of Vladimir Putin. President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will meet with him later this week in Moscow.
This ceasefire is the first serious proposal to stop the fighting here since Russia's full-scale invasion of this country 3 years ago.
NBC's Richard Engel reporting from Kyiv today. The White House says it will resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The search is intensified for the missing University of Pittsburgh student, Sadiqa Konanki. That 20-year-old vanished without a trace while on spring break in the Dominican Republic.
A Dominican police source tells CBS News Konanki and the other women she was traveling with went to the beach with 2 American men. Her friends returned to the hotel while Konanki and one of the men stayed behind. Later video appears to show him returning alone just before 9 a.m. Investigators in the Dominican Republic have re-interviewed the man she was last seen with as they continue combing through surveillance video and phone records. U.S. authorities, including the FBI, are also assisting in the case.
CBS's Manuel Bojorquez, Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., instituting some changes after January's deadly collision between a military helicopter and a passenger jet. Aviation consultant Chris Van Cleve.
The NTSB has found routinely planes and helicopters coming into Washington Reagan were coming within 75 feet of each other. The NTSB chair called that intolerable and issued 2 urgent safety recommendations, essentially saying the FAA needs to keep planes and helicopters apart. Less than 90 minutes later, DOT did just that, extending their temporary restrictions against helicopters around Washington Reagan for the foreseeable future. And now the NTSB says they may need to look at other airports to determine if similar dangers are happening there too.
On January 29th, an American Airlines flight collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter while attempting to land at Reagan Airport. 67 people were killed. SpaceX to the rescue. A 4-person crew set to launch tonight aboard an Elon Musk-built rocket. They're headed to the International Space Station to relieve 2 astronauts stuck in orbit for over 9 months. Rory O'Neill has our report from the Kennedy Space Center.
The crew will launch to the ISS aboard a SpaceX Dragon capsule. Commander Anne McClain says she's eager to reunite with her old friend, Sonny Williams, who ended up on an unexpected long-duration space mission.
They really are in good spirits. Of course, they're ready to come home, and of course, we're ready to launch, but the most important thing is that we do both of those things safely.
Williams and Butch Wilmore had been on station since April when problems developed during their test flight of the Boeing Starliner. Butch, Sonny, and 2 other crew members will return on a different SpaceX Dragon capsule that docked last fall. I'm Rory O'Neill.
A missing woman's been found alive after surviving 6 days trapped in a vehicle that crashed in northwestern Indiana. The Newton County Sheriff's Office says Breonna Cassell was reported missing last week. A passerby located her car off the roadway near a landfill. Cassell was found inside, injured but alive. She'd been using her clothing to absorb water to drink. That 41-year-old now listed in stable condition at a Chicago hospital. It's the latest trend in healthcare. More hospitals treating patients at home.
Medicare, Medicaid, and private health insurers are offering coverage for the service, which sends nurses to patients' homes as they recover. Doctors say patients heal better and faster when they're in a familiar setting because they're less anxious and sleep better. One doctor says it's much better to treat patients in their homes than in the hallways of crowded emergency rooms.
CBS's Michael Wallace. Next at noon, a closer look at U.S. public health policy in the second Trump administration. Family Life's Greg Gillespie does a deep dive on the complicated and controversial issues in medical care in the year 2025. Let's listen.
Healthcare is big news and big business. 1 out of every $6 in America is spent on health care. Plus, there's new news about measles and vaccines coming out, and a new Health and Human Services Secretary. For one doctor's perspective, we bring in Chad Savage. He is a physician with Samaritan Ministries. Dr. Savage, let's start with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. How will the new HHS Secretary affect how Americans individually deal with health care?
Well, RFK is sure going to change a lot of things. He's going to kind of change focus of where the government is looking to improve health. And some of the biggest areas that created contention and actually made his nomination somewhat sketchy, whether or not he would go through, are actually some of the things that I think actually make him the right man for the right time. He has been called by some people a vaccination skeptic. But I would actually argue that what you've seen since COVID is an absolute erosion in trust by the American populace to healthcare establishment. And we are seeing a vaccine hesitancy as physicians or reluctance of patients to get vaccines at levels we have never seen before. And this is because of how the COVID pandemic was handled, which I think was actually fairly poorly. So I don't think if they got another yes man in there, another kind of carbon copy of what we've had before, they would ever be able to reestablish trust. Because if he can get in there, and if you believe what he testifies to, that he is actually open to evidence and persuadable, that he will be able to, with a skeptical eye, look at all the data. And if he comes out and says, you know what, we need to make some tweaks here, or, this over here is really good, and this other thing may be totally bad, we can have a little more faith that he's coming from, because he is coming from a cynical point of view, that what he's saying may actually help reestablish trust in a way, once again, a yes man never would be able to.
What do we need to know about whether children need their childhood vaccinations, or if there are certain people for whom this is the right medical choice, even though you have some political qualms?
So I think the big thing with the COVID vaccine was it was a 2-month study, which at the time kind of seemed logical. I mean, the belief was that this was an emergency. A lot of people were dying, and if this was something that could have prevented it from propagating, that getting it rushed out to the market would be appropriate. In regards to kids specifically, as you mentioned, it was never an emergency in that population. So people who, like myself, who are a little bit skeptical about its use in that population, thought that the government's attempt to mandate it into children, and now in many universities, and to go to school, was totally inappropriate. And a lot of people, sensing that, whether they were right or wrong, became maybe more reluctant to accept the existing recommendations on all vaccines, even those that had better data behind them. So that's where, again, I think something like RFK is really going to be important. And what's really kind of cool about it is that he's not only just addressing the vaccine issue, but he's looking at foods and even how we finance medical care. Really important, because one of the reasons we've lost control of healthcare is how we finance it. We're financing it through the government. We're financing it through insurance companies. And when we do so, we're giving up our freedom to control decisions for ourselves. And that creates a general resentment. How did we get to the point where we're subjugating ourselves to the decision-making of bureaucrats and administrators?
We're talking with Dr. Chad Savage of Samaritan Ministries International, getting his take on the Family Life Newsmaker line today. The way that healthcare has changed in the last, 20 years, certainly, It is much more corporate, much more conglomerate. A lot of hospitals bought up by big corporations, even doctors' offices. You don't have your own local clinic. It's a subsidiary of something that is huge and big. How does that affect people's ability to talk with their doctor, see the same medical professional each time, and be able to trust, yes, take this vaccine, here's a surgery you may need, that kind of thing?
Well, in its fundamental nature, medicine is very much relationship-based. And we've lost that with the corporatization of medical care, where doctors are being pushed on one end to try to produce more and more and more, which just means more visits and more revenue. And we're losing the human aspect. And yet I would argue as a primary care physician myself, that that's one of the most fundamental aspects of the medical relationship is that trust and understanding between the doctor and the patient. We know that patients who understand that their doctor is working for them in their best interest are much more likely to adhere to their recommendations.
Dr. Chad Savage, thank you for your perspectives on what it's like to be a physician taking care of your patients. I'll offer this to our listeners as well. You should check with your own physician for advice on what to do with your medical care. I'm Greg Gillespie, Family Life News.
All right, thank you, Greg. And you can subscribe, listen to, and share this feature, as well as all our original podcasts at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or FamilyLife.org.
Good afternoon. Here is your Family Life regional weather forecast. Cold front moved through the area last night. You're feeling it today. Temperatures running in many cases more than 20 degrees lower than they were yesterday. But temperatures will rise again at the end of the week, heading into a mixed weekend with showers and sun on Saturday. Some heftier rains and thunder perhaps Saturday night and Sunday. But for this afternoon, just chilly. Any sunshine even with a cloud cover. High temps in the upper 30s to the upper 40s. Little patches of light rain and light snow in the area late this afternoon and tonight, focused on western and central New York. Overnight it's cloudy, low temperatures in the upper 20s and 30s. Tomorrow, morning clouds and some sunshine, high temps, low 50s, and even milder Friday again, with some sunshine and high temperatures in the lower 60s.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Finally, noon better late than never. A Toms River, New Jersey woman has returned a book to the Ocean County Public Library that was overdue by 99 years. Mary Cooper was going through some boxes belonging to her late mother when she found it. Somebody had borrowed it back in 1926.
And I find the dates, and I'm thinking this has to have been taken out by my grandfather.
That library doesn't charge late fees anymore, but if it did, the fee for that book would be $18,000. The Ocean County Library is putting that book, titled Homemade Toys for Boys and Girls, in a glass case, so no more borrowing, just looking from now on. And that's our world, the world we live in, Wednesday, the 12th of March. I'm Bob Price, Family Life News.
You've been listening to the Noon Report, heard weekdays on Family Life. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at FamilyLife.org.